like I said, included in the emergency repair kits will be a set of patches. This one is a Park Tool branded. It's a kit. It comes with the glue and many different sizes of patches. The size of patch will be determined on the size of the hole naturally. So there are quite big ones and there are some smaller ones. All the same, choose the one that seems like the right fit. But what we're going to do is first scratch up around the hole that we've found. So also with these Park Tool kits, they have a little piece of sandpaper, which is fantastic. Sometimes there'll be a little metal one. All the same, all we're trying to do is create little grooves for the glue to sit into. So again, find the hole and make sure that you know directly where the hole is, not the general area. So I have the hole pinched in between my fingers here, and it might not be apparent to you because I have black gloves on, but I know where it is. So I'm keeping my eye fixed on that little hole, and I'm going to scratch up directly around it. Right, I'm going to go in multiple directions so as to give the glue the best chance of seeping and holding onto the tube. Great. So you don't have to worry about scratching and creating a bigger hole. If you went that far, then I think you'll know. So my hole is quite small. So there are these circular patches, and I think that'll be plenty of patch for my particular issue. Now, something that the hub manager actually taught me with patching a kit is to let the glue dry for perhaps a minute or more before actually trying to put the patch on itself. So again, I'm keeping my eye directly on the hole. I found the hole, and I'm going to add a fairly liberal amount of glue because I want the glue to seep toward the edges of the patch. So I'm not adding just a little bit. I'm adding a little bit more than I think I might need. Now what I'm going to try to do is try to stop the pool of glue from seeping farther than where I need it. And I'm going to blow on it to try to spread it out, but also to dry it out. So just by blowing it, you can see how it's created a big circle. It's quite natural, pretty easy to do. So I'm basically going to sit here for about a minute or so, and I think we'll cut and come back to this. Once it's dry enough, I'll show you what we're looking for. But we're looking for a tackiness, which will allow the patch a little bit of a head start. The issue is that if you put it on too soon, it slides around, it might move, you add air pushes through the glue, no bueno. So we're just going to sit here for a minute, let it dry out, and I'll show you how to put the patch on in just a sec. So what I did to test to see if it's where I need it is I just kind of touched it with my finger, and you see how it's a bit stringy. That's not what we're looking for. We're going to let it go for another 30 seconds or more. So as that's drying out, I'm going to take my patch. Now your patch might look like this, it might look a little bit different, but it should have a plastic film and sort of a tinfoil backing. Now when you remove this tinfoil backing, it is slightly sticky. We don't want to go touching it with our fingers or putting it on the ground or something. It's going to add a bunch of dirt, which is going to sit in between the two layers, which is only going to prevent the patch from sticking. So again, this is sat for maybe a minute or two. You can tell by when you touch it, it's not so stringy, it's just more tacky, right? And if it's still a little bit stringy, give it time. You don't want to go on too late, but if you put it on too soon, it's just not going to help. So again, I've kept my eye directly on where the hole is, and I want the patch to sort of be centered to where that hole is. I'm going to push it down, and I'm going to hold it quite tightly around all four corners. And I'm just going to sit here now for about another minute or two and perhaps gaze outside at the beautiful weather that we might not be able to enjoy. And maybe after we patch our wheel, we will. So during these times where everybody's trying to distance themselves socially, a lot of people are still going outside for exercise because maybe you are living in an apartment and it's not so conducive to movement. But getting out on a bike is one way that you can get a lot of that movement in. And it's a lot better than taking public transit. You can take your time. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people have time these days, so you can take your time going to the grocery store or having a nice slow ride in the valleys, whatever floats your boat. So I can already tell that my patch isn't sticking so well around the corners. I'm not sure if we can see that, but it's lifting a little bit there, and that's where there wasn't enough glue. But if you had done it right, which I seem to be a little bit sloppy about, you won't have that lift. So this is what we don't want. What you would see is after a minute of holding it or so, you'd be able to kind of bend at it, and it would be with the contour of the tube. It would bend all the same, and it wouldn't lift up like you're seeing here. So given this, the assumption is that we put our patch on, the patch is dried, it's not lifting around the corners, and now all we're gonna do is reinstall the tube. So I'm going to run you through that process. This tube I won't be using because it is a different size than the wheel that I have for the demonstration. So I'm going to put this aside, and we're going to assume that this is your beautifully patched tube. And we are going to take our beautifully patched tube and we are going to reinstall it into our beautifully clean wheel, like I'm sure you all have as well. So, patch tube. Yeah, sure. So if we found a hole toward the outside of your tire, of the tube, then it indicates that you got a hole from the outside going in. If you had a hole from the inside where the valve is located, then what that tells you is that the rim is the thing that caused the hole. So if you didn't slide the tire around too much, what you can actually do is just line the tube up with the valve by putting it in like this, and you can get a general idea. Let's imagine that our hole was here on the tube. We can assume that there was something on this portion of the tire, so you can inspect your tire to see if there's a giant tack sticking out. But if it was on the inside, then what we're going to do is actually inspect that piece of the rim instead. So the reason why we're going to inspect to see if there's anything there is because if we put the tube back in and there was still a giant nail or staple sticking out of your tire, I'm sure that we can all imagine what's going to happen when we reinstall it. All the same, when we go to reinstall it, the valve goes in first. Whenever we deal with wheels, just use the valve as an indicator. And what I'm going to do is pop it through the valve hole, and I did that by pulling the tire back with my finger and just kind of sliding that in, right? And we can have it just kind of pause there for a minute. Now what I'm going to do, it's what I like to teach people, is kind of come over here where there's a loose end of that tire, and I'm going to slide my fingers over. It might get a bit tight, and what I'm going to do is pull up, and I'm going to pull that tire up, and it just popped right over the tube, and it just kind of ate it up quite easily. This is where we want to be. From this step, all we're going to do is tuck our tube in all the way around. Now a lot of people have a tendency to want to go in one direction and just keep moving it, but what can happen is as you push this in, this pulls out. It's sort of circumstantial. It might happen to you, it might not. The way to prevent that is to work from both sides, moving inward to one. If you have a little bit more experience or you just kind of have the handling, then you're just kind of keeping aware of that. Tuck the tube all the way in. Here we are, starting at the valve always. All I'm going to do now is seat the bead. So again, the bead is the wire around the tire, and this is necessary for holding the tire on when it's under pressure. So I'm going to pull back in a way and just kind of slip that over the rim. Now, you're going to want to work your hands opposite each other for this portion because, like I alluded to before with the tube, you could be going in one direction, and as this part comes on, this part comes off. So again, we start at the valve, work our hands opposite each other, pushing the bead on. Now, this is a mountain bike tire. If you have a road wheel at home, It's much skinnier. It'll be a lot more tough around this portion. My best advice to you is think about it like a Chinese finger trap. The harder that you push, the tighter it becomes and the harder it is to slip this last piece on. All the same, I'm using this sort of meaty part of my thumb as the contact surface. I'm rolling forward and then poking, right? And it is a bit of a nuanced piece of knowledge that you learn over time, but ultimately what I'm trying to do is just get that bead into the rim. Once we're at this stage, you just want to make sure that your valve is straight, and we also want to make sure that if your wheel was on, or sorry, if your tire was on backward, there's usually direction indicators as to which way the tread wants to go. If it doesn't have it, like this one doesn't, you can sort of make an assumption if the arrow or there's a tread pattern, arrows point forward. This one I believe would be bidirectional. There is no forward or backward, and that's why it doesn't indicate a particular direction. All the same, what you do want to note is our PSI rating. So on every tire, without a doubt, will be a pressure rating. So what I have here is maximum recommended inflation, and it gives me a number 40 to 65, which is pretty standard for a 26-inch wheel. And another thing to note is the size of the tire. If you needed to replace a tire, buy one online, all the same. There's a set of numbers after the pressure rating, somewhere around your tire. And all we're going to do is note the first number. You're going to have either 700, 26, 24, 12 if it's a kid's bike. This number basically refers to the diameter of the wheel, which can tell you the size of the tube. The second number is the width. I have a 1.95. Not so relevant, but you do want to make sure that the tube that you buy has the correct dimensions. So you might be using a hand pump or whatever's available to you. All the same, we found out what pressure we want to be putting into our wheel, and I've attached my pump. My pump does have a gauge, so I'm going to be using my gauge to get it up to the right pressure. The reason why there's a minimum is that if we have too little pressure in the wheel, when you roll over a bump, a rock, or a curb, you have a chance of pinching your tube and causing a flat. So we do want to make sure that we're above the minimum and no more than the maximum. If you have too much pressure, there's a possibility that the tire can slip off the wheel, or you might get a flat from something very small because it's just overinflated and too hard. All the same, pressure up to 40, sounds like a basketball.